Welcome to Platemark. My name is Anne Shafer, and I'm your host. You are joining us for Series 2, Episode 14 on a history of Western printmaking. We are moving to the northern countries to look at works that are non-religious or secular. There was a huge schism between the Catholic Church and the Protestant Reformation in 1517, which followed on Martin Luther's 95 Theses, which he nailed to the door of the Wittenberg Church on October 31st in 1517. And it opens up huge possibilities for artists who are no longer beholden to the church for its patronage. Plus, there is a growing collecting base of people who aren't the church. So prints are having a moment. Tru and I started talking about it and went on for over 2 hours. So I split them up. There's 2 of these episodes on the secular works from the north, Germany and Flanders mainly. And in this one, we are talking about Master E.S., Lucas van Leyden, Hans Sebald Bayem and his brother Bartel Bayem, Albrecht Altdorfer, and Hans Bolding Green. So here we go.
Welcome to Platemark.
Here we are. Welcome to Platemark. This is Series 2, A History of Western Printmaking. I'm here with my esteemed colleague, Tru Ludwig. Hello.
Hello, Anne Shafer, goddess of all things print related.
Well, I try. Yeah.
And succeed.
Oh, well, thank you.
I mean, really.
Yeah. Well, things are going well.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah, things are perking right along with the Baltimore Fine Art Print Fair. Stay tuned.
It's very exciting.
It is exciting, yeah.
Truly.
We are here today to finally bid adieu to the Italians. We're moving to the northern climes of Germany and Flanders. Before we get to that, I'm going to do my positionality. I identify as a cishet white woman, and I use the pronouns she, her.
I identify as a gay white trans man, and I use the pronouns he, him.
We are recording this at the Purple Crayon Press in Baltimore, Maryland, the land of the Piscataway Conoy people. All right, let's take a micro break.
We're going to be talking about, I would say secular, but let's say more accurately non-religious prints in the north of the Alps.
Yeah, I was about to ask you to tell us what you mean by secular.
Well, all right. So basically, when we do any of those things that have a Jesus and a Mary and any of those religious Bible-related things, those are sacred images generally. As we move in towards secular, meaning non-sacred, or things that are genre scenes from everyday life, or things that are not faith-based. However, today, we're also going to see something that sort of crosses the line a little bit.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting because we're going to be dealing with imagery that was generated in response to the Reformation.
Mm-hmm.
And Martin Luther, here is someone who altered history in a most remarkable way. So Martin Luther is going to be one of the foci of our chat today, but we're going to be talking about prints that weren't necessarily in response to anything religious, but also talking about how Martin Luther used the power of print to really create the Reformation, because he's brilliant that way. The other thing I want to point out before we go any further into this is that I take no sides here. I'm not going to say I'm a Lutheran. I'm not going to say I'm a Catholic. I don't want to say anything against the Catholic Church, because I am so glad that there's somebody in the class who's been to Catholic school, because they know the stories of the Bible, and I'm incredibly grateful to have them there. Now there might be 1 or 2 students in a class that went to Catholic school or know any of this stuff. Another 25% in the class of maybe 20 would be what we call E and C's. That means they go to church on Easter and Christmas, and the rest of them really have no clue at all about any of these stories. And the Bible has changed dramatically in the 30 years since I started teaching.
30 years ago, you had...
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Absolutely. I had God-fearing students. They knew the stories. Absolutely. I'm wildly impressed by what Martin Luther accomplished. And then there comes a moment when, as I think it happens as old white guys get older, they get a little snarkier and they're less kind. And as he got older, I think he veered away from the brilliance that he had as a younger man. But I'll also, in full transparency, tell you that I did go to St. Olaf College in Northfield, Minnesota, which is a school of the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America. It is a Lutheran school. Martin Luther, Lutheran.
Right.
And that's a Protestant kind of school. I wanted to bring to people's attention the fact that non-religious prints had been in existence essentially since the moment prints were printed on paper. Come on, you had to have playing cards, you had to have tarot cards, maps, and other kinds of plain information. But of course, the first book that was ever printed was what, Anne?
The Bible.
Yeah. And then Hartmann Schädel's History of the World,
Mhm.
the Nuremberg Chronicle, was published in 1493, but printing presses were up there doing Chaucer and printing things like that up in England and whatnot.
Oh, literature. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Actual
Yeah.
literature.
And don't forget your favorite Vesalius on the fabric of the human body.
Yeah, come on. Yeah. The idea of all of these things, maps and all of these other useful objects could be made. But I also wanted to point out that there are times when artists, even like the master ES, who was somebody that Schongauer had revered, could embark on certain kinds of, let us say, jocular little moments. He was an engraver who really did start raising the level of engraving in the North. And one of the ones that always got the students tittering, if you will, was Lovers on a Grassy Beach.
Oh, right.
And it's done about 1450. It's an engraving.
We didn't have that in the BMA's collection, sadly.
No. But, Anne, why don't you describe what you're seeing?
So we're looking at a reproduction in Linda Holtz's book, Prints
Which
in
means
the
they're
Western
kind of
World.
tragically
Well,
reproduced, but you get the
great.
general idea here.
But
it'll still do the job.
Linda Holtz is still the general textbook for the history of prints.
Absolutely.
FYI. Okay. Lovers on a Grassy Beach, circa 1450.
Sitting on a bench or a little wall.
Yeah, she's got this beautiful gown that it doesn't flow, but it's very northern and it's crisp. And then there's a young knave
with his pointy shoes.
He's got these little slippers on, and
There's some seriously pointy slippers.
He's got his hand on her breast going honka honka.
Yeah, Lovers on a Grassy Beach. It's a totally Me Too moment.
It's really weird.
Oh my, there's someone squeezing my breasticle.
Yes.
It's really quite humorous. And this from someone who does Madonnas and Childs and interiors and whatnot. But the master ES was a ribald little bugger. Because he also created this remarkable, fantastic alphabet. I adore this. The one that Holtz includes is the letter G, but each letter is a fracture shape. Each of the little elements is made up of some kind of a critter. So letter G in its own way is really quite remarkable because, well, what do we have? A monk carrying another person straddling his shoulders in a not very decorous way. It could be a nun. And nibbling on the nun's elbow is a monk with his backside revealed and his pingus hanging down. And that leads over to an owl that's sitting on a branch. And then here comes a monkey who's playing with something. It might be himself. And that leads down to a dog that's gnawing on a bone and a monkey that's playing a horn, all of which is wildly ribald and quite naughty.
It's like Bosch and Bruegel before
they even existed.
Right.
So this whole alphabet is really naughty. It's quite delightful. He must have spent time engraving this. All 24 letters.
Right. Why an alphabet?
Why not?
Well, right.
Right? It's like, what could I do now?
Yeah.
I would love to have known in what context they existed. When you'd have to teach a 3-hour class in the dark and you need to wake students up, you show them things like Lovers on a Grassy Beach, where he's literally honking her hootie, and then this alphabet. And honestly, you should see some of the others. But this one is particularly naughty because of the backside and there's a penis hanging down there. It's right there.
Oh, he's well endowed.
Well, yeah, considering he's a monk and he won't get to use it in theory, right? In theory. Right. And then another one that absolutely captivates me. I saw this print at an exhibition called Origins of European Printmaking at the National Gallery in 2005, and it killed me. I thought this was hilarious. It's done about 1480. And, well, Anne, you tell me what you're seeing in this. It's a hand-colored woodcut.
Right. So at the bottom, there's a ship with 3 oars out and an anchor. And then standing perched atop the mast are way oversized figures, 2 people crowned and almost totally naked.
Yes.
And they look like they might be wrestling.
One source says they're wearing wrestling trunks. I think they're in their underpants, frankly, and nothing else. And what it is an image of King Frederick III, and he's grappling with Pope Paul II. They're literally grappling over the ship of state. So all of this is talking about how much money should go to the church and should
the ship as a metaphor for a nation?
Yes.
Huh.
And it's hilarious. Plus, there's a comet in here, which was a reference perhaps to Halley's Comet, which had flown by in, I don't know, 1467 or something. And everyone, it portends ill will. Now, I can tell you that's the Pope because it's got a bing, 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 that three-part tiara.
Right, he's got a big hat on.
Well, big hat is
What do they
triple
call
crown.
this?
It's a triple crown.
Triple crown.
The other thing I adore about this particular woodcut is that they're speaking in what we call banderoles. In current days, we would have speech bubbles in cartoons. Banderoles are strings of ribbon with all of this text of what they're saying, like adding machine tape as it came out of the machine.
Little curls at the end.
Yeah. Let's say that once we finish talking about this cool stuff we're looking at, you'd be wading through a whole bunch of banderoles all over the floor. Well, here they're squabbling over the ship of state. And I think it's absolutely. And it's so irreverent. And there's a coat of arms for the king, and there's the castle.
It's like Domia or something.
It is.
Right.
And this, think about how early this,
right.
That's brazen. And multiples, they're out there, and this one's hand colored and
for a higher audience.
Yes,
quote unquote.
And but the thing that's also interesting is that we don't have that many of these things that linger, because things that were used by more popular playing cards, tarot cards, they're going to get used. Not like a worshipful thing that we're going to keep in a precious box or in a portfolio. Right. Oftentimes the things that get used the most are going to disappear. But this one, it fractures me. It's hilarious. And it's no different than right now. Mm-hmm. You could plug in two different leaders at this very moment, and they'd be teetering on the mast of this ship of state, and the oars that are powering the ship are various little regions of some country, whether it's Ukraine or what have you. It's very cogent and I'm loving it. So that's an early form of secular artwork. It can't not deal with the church, because that is the fundamental glue of society at the time, right?
The point about the church being the governing glue is absolutely correct and easy to forget.
Oh, I think exactly.
It wasn't like we were a one religion state or something, but there was an overarching.
Absolutely. Yeah. And your salvation, you had no idea how you were making it on this planet. You could be taken out at any time. As you'll see, you had to live a good life or be in fear that at the final judgment day you would be found wanting, and then you would go down to purgatory, and eventually you'd have to go to hell. Or if you behaved really well in your life and you repented of your sins, then maybe you'd get to go to heaven. But that's all part of that whole Catholic hierarchy of ideas.
Well, it's a way of organizing masses of people into society.
Absolutely. And in many ways, it makes a ton of sense.
Shared rules and
guidance and laws of faith, right? Let's fast forward a tiny bit more. We talked about Dürer in the past. One of the things that we had talked about was that in 1521, Dürer went up to the Netherlands. He went up to the Low Countries that are down along the shore of the North Sea. And up there, he met a person named Lucas van Leyden. Leyden is a university town in what we could call the Netherlands. And it was where Rembrandt would end up stemming from. Lucas van Leyden is someone that Albrecht Dürer literally did travel to see as he was, hawking his prints in 1521. And they met and they exchanged prints, and Albrecht Dürer had done a silver point portrait of Lucas van Leyden.
What?
Yeah.
Wow. I always think of Lucas as before Dürer somehow, but I know. Obviously I'm wrong.
Well, the thing is that he was 20 years younger.
Oh, gosh.
And the thing that is also interesting is I think he's wildly overlooked. When we pulled out the print that we always do for Lucas van Leyden of the Milkmaid, which he'd engraved in 1510, his touch is even lighter than Dürer's. It's more delicate. It's not as charming. It's a little softer and a little bit more...
A little refined.
Yeah, a little bit more fun. Lucas van Leyden might have been born either in 1489 or maybe 1494. But we know that he died in 1533. Now, it could be said that he was a child prodigy. He was incredibly adept, and he was also a painter, but of course it's way easier to ignore his paintings because his prints are so superb. He had done 175 engravings in his lifetime. when we look at some of his very first engravings. If we go on the fact that he was born around 1494 and we look at this magnificent print called the Milkmaid, which he created in 1510 because he dated it, that would make him a whopping 16 years old. I know. It's really frustrating. So let's go ahead and say that he was born, he would be 20 had he made it. If he was born, okay, fine. So that tells you that there's young and a ton of talent. His name is listed amongst the crossbowmen of the city in which he grew up. He was an artistic soul. Lucas van Leyden created an image that is unlike anything we have seen to date in 1510. And this was one we loved to pull out for the students.
Pretty great print.
Pretty great. Come on. This thing is a whopping, it's the size of a photograph. It's 4.5 by 6 1/8 inches. It's really a small,
like a big index card.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And okay, Anne, tell us what you're seeing in this. Tell me what you see in this fabulous image.
I need my cheaters.
Keep your cheaters
on,
lady.
There are 2 cows in the middle. One is facing left. The other one is looking at us from behind. On the left, there's a young cow herder. And on the right is the milkmaid. Oh, there's another cow behind her.
Yeah, all kinds of cows.
Yeah, she's barefoot. Eesh.
And she's also carrying a bucket, which is presumably full of milk that she has taken out of the cow.
Right, and it's a beautiful farmyard.
It really is. Now, we've never seen anything like this. This is an homage to beautiful textures on the ground. It has the same northern love of the tiny detail of rocks and stones and little bits of grass and leafy trees and even a wonderful aerial perspective in the background. Considering he lived in the Low Countries, that's quite a rise behind them.
Right.
However, we have this tall, strapping lad who has walked up and he's looking from the left across a very large cow who looks like it could be milked any moment now, to the very buxom young lass who has those buxomnesses are really jacked up with a nice little bustier, right? And she's doing her work.
Look at the main cow's tail is whipped up and over to swat the flies away.
And even that, okay, so think about it. Truly is. That's like absolutely noticing the small of the everyday world. And that's a northern, Anne's pulling it up on Google because see, look how gorgeous that is. And I look at how Lucas puts his L there in the center and the plaque in the bottom.
Plaque in the middle bottom there.
Yeah. And
Her feet are kind of clubby.
She has to walk around in those. He's not exactly doing great either. Look at him. He's got these big old feet.
She's got a hat on her right.
And what's really convenient is that cow's head is covering his groinal area.
Oh, do we think he's excited?
Well, let's think about why one of the very first images we see of a milkmaid, a buxom lass, a strapping lad, and they're very aware of each other. And he's looking across this cow at the young lady, and she's walking in from the right.
She's being all demure.
Right. But the word we're going to use here, and I would tell this to the student, is melken is to milk. And she's a milkmaid, and it is also meaning to attract or lure.
Oh.
So in a way, he's wishing he could milken the lady with a and she looks like that's going to be the thing. And I wanted to give you a lovely quote here. The term's origin is more or less explained in an anonymous Dutch book where the Nova Poemata, in which women in the act of milking a cow, it's a quote, a sinewy thing she has seized with joy.
Oh.
And so on, by comparing it by grabbing a man's attention. This is sexually charged. It's 1510. Now, that's not to say that Lucas van Leyden didn't do enormous cycles of Christian imagery, Old Testament, New Testament, all kinds of things. But this really comes out of nowhere, it seems. But that's not entirely true. Now, look at his mark. Anne's got this blown up to... It could be 18 by 24. Thank you, Google. Yeah. But he understands cross contour. He understands hatching.
Oh, just look at the way the belly of the central cow is.
And the teats are looking completely
teat-like,
yankable.
And the neck of the cow is very convincing.
It's anatomically quite believable, right? Just as the various milking parts of our milkmaid look very anatomically believable as well. So it's fetching. If the guy was 16 when he did it, it makes all kinds of sense. You know? Even if he was 20, it still kinds of makes it makes all kinds of sense. Right. So Lucas van Leyden was clever. He made 175 engravings, But he also was aware of this new kind of clientele that is surfacing. From 1513 to 1517, he kicks out two different cycles called the Power of Women.
What?
Yes. And there's two large sets and two small sets of prints, and it's all about the representation of how women hold power for good or ill. And of course, let's think about it. Now we're having a new kind of print interest clientele, and they don't always want everything to be religious. So this is another incredibly popular topic in the early part of the 15th and into the 16th century, of course. These images depict traditional roles of women and men, but in reverse. So it's neat because women are dominating men.
Nice.
And some of them are legendary historical women who are doing wonderful things, virtuous heroines that are doing things, but also other women who are doing things that involve cunning and seduction and manipulation of men. And so the Power of Women theme he's one of the earliest to do these. We've just seen a Milkmaid, and you realize that he's cranking up his whole Power of Women series. It's very, very, very popular. Not just with Lucas, but with collectors and other artists, because the idea was that men could fall prey to their seductive powers. Even the wisest of men couldn't quell their groinal impulses because women are that way.
Mm-hmm.
So, and there was an interesting show at the National Gallery called Ave Ava. And
Ava Ave.
yeah. See, you remember that. See?
Well, yeah, I couriered that show up to Ottawa.
Well, tell us more.
Well, I had 6 crates and there were 2 of us, and we were unpacking and condition noting everything. And
Do you realize that was what you were doing at that time?
well, I knew it was a cool show by Diane Russell, and she was my boss at the time, actually.
Yeah, I'm thinking about this person who I met named Ann Shafer that was into watercolor when I met you.
Yes, that's
and
true.
now it's like, but it was that show. And it also delights me to think about the cunning, the wiles of women, but also the fact that these genre topics could be quite remarkable. The Power of Women, when he starts it, there's one cycle that's done with woodcut, and they're largish. They're 6 by 11 inches. And
That's
it's his first,
huge.
it is, but it's essentially the same size as
Apocalypse?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But this is a different kind of apocalypse because it's the power of women. And so his first version of the poet Virgil suspended in a basket is a woodcut that he does in 1512.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very popular. And well, tell him. Go ahead. What's the problem with the poet Virgil? And why is he being suspended in a basket?
Oh, he was being randy, and somebody made plans with him and to lure him to meet with them, and he ended up strung up in a basket for all of town to see.
Because he's an older codger, and he's like, hi, well, I'd really like to get with the emperor's younger daughter.
Oh, right.
She's really pretty. And so the younger daughter says, oh, come on, poet Virgil, and invites him over, and you get in this basket, and I'll bring you up to my room. And and she brings it halfway up the building and leaves him dangling out there all night. So the next morning, the entire city comes and sees this stupid old horny guy hanging out her window. Here we have the woodcut version that he does in 1512. And we'll see a beautiful restatement of it that we would show the students every time.
Mm-hmm.
He would do some 13 years later.
In engraving.
Mm-hmm. He would do images that weren't biblical, such as Lucretia. That was also the power of women. Now, Lucretia goes back to the Roman concept of a woman who had been defiled. And what she does is go back to her family and say to her dad and her brothers, you go take care of this and take out this guy. He did a bad thing, but she also kills herself because she's been dishonored.
Oh, God.
And actually, Rembrandt did 2 beautiful versions of that painting.
Right.
But in this case, here we have Lucas van Leyden showing off his chops, if you will. This is an engraving from 1515. And I can understand why Dürer would want to meet this young man. Because there's this, well, she's not a fragile flower, this Lucretia that we're seeing who's nude with this crazy wiry hair. She's going to have to kill herself because this guy completely destroyed her. And it's a very interesting opportunity for him to show a woman nude in its twisting pose, but it's also her anger at what she has been forced to do. I find that really interesting and convincing. And that'll continue to be a popular theme because things from classical history, classical mythology are starting to become more and more interesting. Another thing that Van Leyden would do images of everyday people, like the beggars. We have this marvelous 6 by 7 inch engraving of little locals, people that would go around and beg. And this is important because this is early. Now, we'll see Callot do a whole series of beggars 100 years later.
Right.
And we'll see Rembrandt do a cycle with images with beggars.
And Adrian van Ostade.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
But here we see a very early version of paying attention to all these
1520. Yeah.
Of all these different kinds of people, and wonderful engraving. Think about this: engravings of beggars for people who are starting to collect prints and discussing them and thinking about putting them in their collection and what does it mean to be a beggar. We would show them our Baltimore Museum of Art print of the surgeon or musicians, these different kinds of people that could make life very interesting. They're delightful, they're wonderful, and they're not big at all. For instance, the musicians is a whopping 4 by 3 inches. And this is where you start to really see his excellence. I have had a conversation with a couple people who think he's better than Albrecht Dürer.
Wait, yeah, you can't whisper.
I have to. I can't
No,
say it out loud. You say it. I can't say it.
What the whisper was, there are some people who think Lucas van Leyden is better than Dürer.
I couldn't say it, but the one that we loved pulling out for the students was the larger scale, the poet Virgil suspended in a basket, and it comes from 1525. It's a very good size print. Now, again, this is a classical piece of lore coming from ancient Rome. And would you talk to me about what you're seeing in this image of the poet Virgil suspended in a basket?
There's a lot of stuff going on in the foreground, particularly on the right. There's a group of people, and I'm not really clear on what they're doing. And then there's a bunch of little teeny weeny kids on the left.
They're all pointing and laughing at that poor
And
ass.
now, yes, so suddenly you realize that there's a basket hanging down the side of the building, but it's way
in the background. And this is a ploy that Van Leyden would use, this understanding of foreground, middle ground, background. And think about how he's gotten the lighter stroke in the background. And in the foreground, you have all these different ages and kinds of people looking like chuckling at it. And this older woman's like, you see, that's what happens if you can't keep it. She's literally telling this jester guy, you got to keep it in your pants, pal. And these little kids are totally laughing. And the whole city is laughing and pointing at this poor guy that's hanging from the 3rd floor of a castellated structure. And this is downtown Leyden, 1525. It's not the poet Virgil.
It's set in today.
And so there's still this moralizing lesson that could be taken from it. He's at the peak of his skills here in terms of his ability to modulate space and light and time and involve people of every class. There's so much that can be learned from things like the poet Virgil, who was Roman. But apparently he's hanging from a basket in downtown Leyden so that you can understand that, right? And you could have your conversations about such things. So I would say his stroke is lighter, and it has a kind of, there's a lighter heartedness to it. You would never see Dürer figures chuckling and mocking people in the background. They're charming.
No.
And Lucas van Leyden, he's come from the Netherlands. It's a different kind of a gig this guy's doing for us. So
I'm more of a forefather to Rembrandt then.
And great point, because Rembrandt owned Lucas van Leyden prints, and so did Goltzius. They both, those being folks from the Netherlands, they were proud of the fact that he was one, and he's really the only one we know about from the Netherlands at this time. Certainly the only one that could be a competitor to Dürer, and Dürer meets him in Antwerp, does a silver point sketch of him. They exchange prints. That's a big deal because Dürer was already cock of the walk by that time, you know, realizing that Van Leyden is giving us these new kinds of genre scenes and this concept that the humanists would love, these tales from classical times and whatnot. I think we should probably go down to Germany, but I love the fact that we get our first real genre scenes, the kind that we would get with Rembrandt 140 years later, with this fella who is a child. Well, he was what, 16 or 20 years old when he engraved that. He's on it. He's clever. His biblical imagery is really quite beautiful too. Some of the guys that we'll be talking about later, particularly Rembrandt and Goltzius, well, they're all about it.
Wait, so when Lucas is working in Leyden and it's 1510, are they're not Protestant yet?
Nope, not at all, because he's part of a group of people that could be starting to get a little frustrated with the Catholic Church.
Okay.
Because the entirety of the European continent is under the sway of the Catholic Church. Everybody is going with the structure that's been in place hundreds and hundreds of years. But it's not until Martin Luther comes along in 1517. There were little tiny annoyances. Things were gathering speed. You could tell that something was going on. But he really pulls this out. I think he's aware, for instance, like Israel van Mechenum, who was doing prints of classical tales maybe 10 years earlier. There's an art market out there for it. So why not start, branching out a little bit? But now we're going to go down to Germany, and we would be wrong to not discuss the Kleinmeister. What does Kleinmeister mean?
The small master,
The little masters. And they are little masters because the works these guys make are little, teeny.
Yeah, 3x2-ish.
We had 3 really great BAMs in the collection, and they were mounted together in the same mat. The exquisite quality of the engraving, it's so precise, so tiny. It's unbelievable. So the BAMs, there was Hans Sabel BAM and his brother Barthel.
Okay.
Yeah, and the thing that's interesting also is that most of the scholars will say that Barthel was the inventive one, but Hans Sebald was the more prolific one and was quite the entrepreneur, and he cranked out maybe as many as 2,000 images. Yes. These guys were living in, where is a great central place to be being for prints? Why, Nuremberg. And the Kleinmeister, the little masters, they're the ones we're going to pay attention to for the moment are the BAMs.
I thought it was just them.
No, there's another
There's
couple.
a whole group of them.
Yeah, but these are the guys. These are the biggest of the tiny.
Okay.
So the thing that they did, though, was that, yes, of course they did Old Testament scenes. Yes, of course they did mythological scenes, but they also did a bunch of other things. Now, some of their prints would teach lessons, and some of that they're all teeny weeny, perfectly wonderful, magical little images. And some of them be very popular subjects, but they also would branch out. So they did an entire cycle on the labors of Hercules.
Yeah.
There's a whole series of images they did on the Old Testament, but they're always really erotic. For instance, Barthel had worked with Marcantonio Raimondi. Do you remember us talking about
Imodi?
Yes. If you look up something like The Tale of Potiphar's Wife,
Oh, right.
oh my. I mean, oh my. It's really ribald. And then they would also have genre scenes. The ones, of course, I love are the scenes of peasant life and the seasons and what they do in those various scenes. But there could be death, there could be humor, there would be sex. Oh, look, and I know this is a biblical story. We're using air quotes here, okay? So Joseph and Potiphar's wife, what are you seeing there in this print?
Well, it looks like they're done.
Sorry.
Looks like Potiphar's wife is still in bed, rising, and Joseph is wandering off in his naked glory, and they're both nude. And boy, you can see her vava and his PP.
Yes, that is done. You're right.
Yes,
they're finished. But in this entire series, it's quite remarkable.
Jeez.
So there's that. And then other things like these little ornament prints that are off the chain gorgeous, just crazy. The ones that we had in the collection, there was a little jester. Do you remember him? He was teeny weeny. And these ornamental things, they could be decorations. They could be things that are gorgeous that could be glued into books or boxes or albums or pasted to walls and furniture. They could be part of pattern books. They were in such incredible detail that they really showed that goldsmith's attention to these tiny little images. And so ours at the BMA, the little jester was a big hit. The students loved that. My favorite was the whole village festival. They would do this wonderful cycles, like the Peasants' Feast or the 12 months. They would show them playing, and look, they're doing sackbuts, and those are, of course, erotic. Sackbuts and bagpipes. If you think about how a bagpipe is held and how he's noodling on the chanter of it.
It's quite...
This is like a skin flute kind of a situation. Yeah. And off he's hauling this woman. But the one that the kids always fell apart. They loved this. Was the one for November. They're playing along and they're and they're dancing and then blah!
Yeah, the guy's throwing up.
Totally throwing up.
Nice.
But there's incredible things because they're tiny, hilarious, and beautifully engraved. But how many times have we seen spewing? so far.
Yeah.
These Kleinmeister are very interesting guys. This whole seasonal thing is from the 1540s, but they were making all of these things. By 1525, they were really had quite a reputation. Realizing, though, that they're in Nuremberg. Now, here's the thing. Nuremberg, we're already, I have to try and get you into an order. The Reformation had already started, and Nuremberg was still Catholic at the moment. And Sebald and his brother Barthol and another guy, they were thrown out. The ungodly artists, they threw them out.
They threw him out of Nuremberg?
Yes, they were expelled from Nuremberg.
My.
The godless painters. In 1525, I have a wonderful quote for you. In 1525, three godless painters, Hans Sebald, his brother Bartholbaum, and George Painch, were banished from Nuremberg for asserting that they did not believe in baptism, Christ, or transubstantiation. They were able to return within months, but Baum was exiled again in 1528, get this, for publishing a book believed to plagiarize an Albrecht Dürer manuscript.
Huh.
Yeah. So, he's copied something from Dürer's not dead until 1528. But the fact that they got expelled from the city and then they got to come back. Why? Because within a few months, the city had voted in 1526 to become Protestant. They were the godless painters. Think about them being that's brazen.
Yeah.
And they got thrown out, but they got to come back, but that's okay. And so they would make things like wallpaper and pretty little ornaments, and they would self-publish, which I think is interesting. And they could do classical myth and history and all kinds of stuff. So I think it's imperative that we know about them. If you want to have a good time, you look at the Labors of Hercules. They're carved beautifully. Another thing that we had at the BMA was this fantastic little engraving of an escutcheon that is supported by two little genii, two little
ornamental ones, yeah.
And they're really quite stunning.
Yeah.
And another one was this crazy little alphabet. And it was this adorable little gentle banderole of letters, and it just, because it was pretty.
Yeah.
That's where you start to understand how much more openness there was to subject matter. When you're making prints, you're dealing a mass appeal. And now there's more of a culture of people that want these little images, and little is affordable, but also beautiful. I'm going to show another one of Joseph and Potiphar's wife to Anne now from that same cycle. And you'll see.
Little.
It's little, but it's certainly not.
All right, this is Sebald Baum, Joseph and Potiphar's wife from 1526.
I think this is before. The one you saw before was after.
Oh.
Exactly. So come up and look at my...
He's ready to go.
Exactly. But it's Old Testament. So we're teaching a lesson.
Nobody has sex in the Old Testament.
No, nobody begat anybody. Right? So they're really quite remarkable. They're beautiful, tiny little prints, and some of them quite frank, if you will.
Crazy, man.
And, I'm into it. Anne isn't always, but I thought you'd know about that. So... I wanted to
make me sound like such a prude.
Well, no.
Sometimes I am a little prudish.
Well, there's certain things you enjoy and certain things you clearly don't.
I feel like I should enjoy the erotic things at home with my husband, not on the wall of a museum.
Somebody that I wanted to bring to mind for a moment that sometimes is grouped with the Kleinmeister, also Germanic, Albrecht Altdorfer. And this is off topic in one respect, but it was something I loved it when we brought this out for the students. Altdorfer became so adept, and he had made these a whole cycle, 40 woodcuts. One of the things I love to have Anne bring out, and repeat for me, what did you say it was? What when we had to bring it out?
Well, at some point, Susan Dackerman purchased a set of 38 Altdorfer mini prints. And they were part of a set, although they were lacking 2, right?
Yes.
So it's a series of 40, but they were all hinged, but they hadn't been glued down to a mat board. So they were all loose.
Some were completely loose. And they were the size of baseball cards.
Right. And if you
2 by
breathed
3
too
inches.
hard, they would blow. It was terrifying.
But they're ridiculous because Altdorfer had purportedly drawn them onto the block directly, and he had this idea, and how could he outdo Dürer? So the only way he could be better than Dürer is to create a cycle that was tinier. Because you remember Dürer had done these passions, and they're the large wooden passion, the small engraved passion, la la la. And so here comes Altdorfer along with this fallen redemption of man, which takes you all the way from the original sin all the way to heaven. And my favorite one in this whole cycle, I would always make the students look for it, was the where Christ ascends into heaven.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the blocks are so tiny that you can't show earth going up to heaven. So essentially, you have the whole group of people looking up at a bunch of clouds, and the bottoms of these two little feet are sticking through, and it's the funniest thing. But he manages this space. It's minuscule, but he's drawing it on there. There's some other poor sap, the Formschneider that carves the block, had become so adept by this time that he could create this. Oh God, there it is, the ascension of Christ for the fallen salvation of mankind through the life and passion of Christ. It's
it's hilarious.
And even on your computer screen, it's 3 times larger than when you see.
I'm on the Met's website as usual because they have excellent images. It's a group of people kneeling and looking up as Jesus is ascending. And then there's this really big separation between the people on the ground and of the earth and him rising into heaven. But you can only see the bottom of his robe and the bottoms of his feet.
It literally
the clouds.
And notice in the top left corner what Albrecht Altdorfer has done with his logo.
Well, he's basically copied Dürer. It's an A with an A underneath.
Instead of an A with a D.
Right.
So it's like, it's smaller. For once, size counts. It's smaller. But the other thing that Altdorfer...
How do we know he drew it on the block?
There was evidence of it.
Really?
I think it's in Ivan's. They found one of the blocks, and he would do it on the 4 corners of one slab so that they could print them 4 up. Because you wouldn't want to take one little bitty block and print it one, right? So you have 4 up, and you could get it done. Then he cut them apart. These feet, they crack me up. Each of the compositions is remarkable because he pushes space in this minuscule. It's the size of a credit card, for crying out loud.
Right.
So he does that to show up big old Albrecht. And then he uses this Albrecht Altdorfer with the AA under it. But the other thing is that he starts doing pure landscape. If you go into a garden or any basic art history text, they'll show you one of the very first landscapes, pure landscape, nothing else, just a beautiful tree or a tree in the foreground with some mountains behind. And it's the very first instances of just landscape, which is a print collector's delight. It's not a heavy-handed story. It's a wonderful image that you could own. And some of them would be almost postcardish in terms of that's the kind of larch tree that we have in our area. And it could be very descriptive, but they're very first landscapes. Now, those are coming around about, 1520, 1523. Now, we're going to have to continue to think about why these new forms are appearing about 1520, 1523.
Wow.
And it was after Albrecht Dürer had published 3 large book woodcuts, and Altdorfer finds the guy that can cut stuff that small. So that we have the whole fall of man. Adam and Eve are munching on that apple, and then they're thrown out, and there's Annunciation, Visitation, Nativity, there's a Last Supper. It goes all the way through 40 images. Of the whole set, we had 38 of the 40. I think that's amazing that you had 38 of those baseball cards.
Some Intrepid, I forget who they bought them from, but some Intrepid dealer had managed to collect 38 of them.
I think that's astonishing.
Yeah, she bought them all at the same time as a group.
Yeah, but if you think about it, 40 teeny weeny prints, imagine being able to present those in your collection. That's a heck of a thing to own. So there's Altdorfer doing the Christian thing, right, in 1513, but then he really does expand out into landscapes. There's a whole genre of German landscape etchers. I think about Rembrandt being one of those first in the Netherlands to do it, but this is 100 years earlier in Germany. And that's not to say that Albrecht Altdorfer didn't paint a few humdingers. He'd paint big history paintings using landscape as the main actor. But he's one of the part of that whole magnificent German. There's a German Renaissance lit. Dürer is part of it. Holbein is the end of it. Grunewald kicks it off. And Germany's arts are so splendid in the first half of the 16th century.
16th, right?
Yeah. So there's that. Right.
That's where we split up the episodes. We're stopping with Hans Bolden Green, and we'll wait for the next episode to move on with the rest of the artists. Lucas Cranach and Hans Holbein. Thank you for listening to Platemark. It has been our pleasure to be with you for this whole series, and I'd like to, as always, send a special thank you to my partner, Tru Ludwig, who never ceases to amaze me, and one to Michael Diamond for the use of his original music. Images that we talk about on the podcast are available to you at platemarkpodcast.com so that you can follow along and see what we're talking about. Don't forget to mark your calendars for the Baltimore Fine Art Print Fair, which is coming up rapidly at the end of April 29 through May 1st. There is information available to you about the fair at baltimoreprintfair.com. Other than that, we'll see you next time.